Now I have all of the complex elements separated into their own layers inside of pre-compositions, so I can animate everything very easily. Now obviously this does not look like the artwork. That's because we only have one copy of each object and they're not placed where they need to be. So to do this, I want to turn on my original artwork layer. If I scroll down to the bottom of my comp and enable my original house layer, and then I'll turn off everything except my upper window layer. So if I click on this first layer, scroll up and shift click until this layer, and then hold Command or Control on a PC and click on this last layer, then I can turn off the eyeball for all of those layers all at once, so I'm left with just my upper window pre-comp. Now, I'm just going to use my original artwork as a reference. I'm not going to get caught up with aligning everything perfectly, I'll just use it as a reference. So I'll zoom in a little bit, and then with the selection tool, I will click and drag on this layer until it's about where I want it. Then I'll duplicate this layer by going to Edit, Duplicate. Now before I click this, I want to point out that if you look on the right side of any menu command that has a keyboard shortcut, it lists what the keyboard shortcut is right there. Keyboard shortcuts are essential for speeding up your workflow. I use them constantly and they save me tons of time. So I want to encourage you to start learning these keyboard shortcuts for commands that you use a lot. Duplicating a layer happens all the time inside of After Effects. So I'm going to press Command D or Control D on a PC to duplicate my layer. Now we have two different copies. With the second one selected, I'm going to click and drag to get my window positioned roughly where I want. Now I know I want all my windows centered horizontally, so to make sure that I only move my window left and right, I'm going to hold Shift on the keyboard so that I can only move it left or right or up and down. And then I'll get it to about where I want it and let go. Then I'll do this process again, press Command or Control D on a PC, click, hold down Shift, reposition, and that looks pretty good. Then I'll click on the centered window again, duplicate, click, hold down Shift, reposition this way, duplicate one more time, click, hold Shift, drag, and let go. Now we're going to use the Align palette one more time to make sure that there's equal spacing between each one of these windows. So I'll select all of my windows by holding Shift and clicking on the others, and then I'll come to my Align palette and see that Align to Layers is set to Selection. This should automatically happen when you're clicking on multiple objects. If it's still set to Composition for you, just make sure that it's changed to Selection. And then I want to come down to the Distribute Layer section. This button here will distribute all of my layers equally on a horizontal axis. So if I click on that button, all of my layers were just repositioned ever so slightly so that there's equal distance between each layer. I'll undo one more time. If you watch the layers, while I click on this button, you can see that they all just moved a little tiny bit. Now I know that they're all equally spaced, but I don't think that it's perfectly centered in the composition anymore. Now, like I said, you don't have to make this perfect, but I'm going to show you how just in case you ever need to. I know that this layer is my center window, so what I want to do is link all of these other layers to that layer. To do that, with all of my layers selected, I'll come down to any one of the selected layers' pick whips, click, drag down to the first layer, which is my center window, and let go. That will parent all of the selected layers to the layer that you had selected, which in this case is the center window. Parenting links the transform properties of the child layers to the parent layer. So now if I click and drag on my window, you can see that the position is affecting all of the layers. And if I were to rotate this, the rotation changes as well. So it's linking all of these layers to a master layer. I'll undo to get back where we were. And now if I come to my Align palette and make sure that Align Layers 2 is set to Composition, I can click on the horizontal center alignment, and now my windows are centered horizontally with equal spacing between each window. Now let's do the same thing with the lower window. I'll turn that layer on, reposition it to about where I want it, duplicate by pressing Command or Control D on a PC, Shift, click and drag, duplicate again, Shift, click and drag, duplicate one more time, Shift, click and drag. Now because there's no window in the center, vertically distributing these layers won't work the same way. If I were to do that, it spreads them out in a way that I don't like. To get around this, I'll undo, and I'm going to make one extra duplicate of my lower window and put it in the center, just temporarily. Then I'll select my other windows, horizontally distribute them, parent them to that center window, click on the center window, align it to the center, and then delete that layer. Now I have my 4 equally spaced windows centered horizontally. Then I'll turn on the door, drag that down until it's about where I want it, and then center it horizontally. I'll turn on my lamp, click and drag that until it's about where I want it, duplicate it, click, shift, and drag until it's about where I want it, and then I'll do that same trick again. I'll duplicate this lamp a third time temporarily, position it roughly in the center, shift click on the other two layers, horizontally distribute them, parent them to that centered layer, select that layer and then horizontally center it on the composition, and then delete that temporary centered layer. Now you can see that things are not lining up perfectly to the original artwork, and that might be because my original artwork wasn't perfectly centered. But because we're doing it this way with the Align palette, we can know that everything is lining up perfectly. Next, let's do the bush. I'll select that layer and then click and drag it to the top of the Layers palette. Now I'm actually going to want to pre-compose this bush as well, not because there are multiple objects, but because I'm going to be using the same animation for all 4 bushes. And if it's pre-composed, I'll only have to animate it once. So I'll pre-compose the layer by going to Layer, Pre-compose, renaming it Bush Pre-comp, press OK, go into that pre-comp, click the layer, Option Command Home or Alt Control Home on a PC, center it in the composition, change the composition size, and then come back out into my original composition. Then I'll click and drag this layer to about where I want it, duplicate, shift, click, and drag, duplicate, shift, click, and drag, duplicate, shift, click, and drag. And then again, I'll make a centered layer, distribute all of these layers horizontally, parent them to the center layer, center it on the composition, and then delete the temporary object. Next, let's do the doorstep. This one does not need to be pre-composed, so I'll snap the anchor point to the center by holding Option Command Home or Control Alt Home on a PC, and then just make sure that it's centered horizontally on the composition, and that one's good to go. Then we'll do the same thing for the baseboard. Set the anchor point to the middle, center it horizontally, and then we'll do the same for the roof. Set the anchor point to the middle, center horizontally. We'll take the trim, do the same thing. The siding. And that's it. If I turn off my original artwork layer, we can see that we have all of our individual elements separated into layers, centered nicely, and we can move on to animation. The next step for your class project is to get back into After Effects and break down your artwork into multiple layers for every object that you want to animate. Once you're done, post a screenshot of your composition showing me that you have layers broken out into individual objects or pre-compositions, and you'll get bonus points if you kept your project organized.